Looking forward to your talk, Pablo. Yeah.
No, I was actually going to say that I have some thoughts to share after the synopsis. And you said everything in the synopsis. So I reverted to some quotes from the Mahatma letters that we can discuss. It was actually great what you did in all the groups. It was quite easy. I thought it was going to be difficult, except for our group. Our group was a mess. I think we were too many scientists there. All the rest, very well defined, Ours was a little, but no, it was a great experience. I really enjoyed it. So let's see what the groups came up with. And it's interesting to see how many themes are repeated through all the groups. So that's quite interesting, and especially that we belong to different countries, cities, traditions, but yet you can see the unity behind, in our overall worldview. So the first question was, what is science in the theosophical sense? Group 1 said that science from a theosophical point of view, I put here just a little cue so that as we go through the answers, you remember what we are talking about. It is a conscious and altruistic effort to awaken the faculty of perception of the inner processes of life on every plane. Let me say a few things. You'll see the altruistic effort. This is something essential that we will see in the Mahatma letters is present. And the idea of this effort is to extend the field of perception to every plane, always working from the idea of the one life and the unity of all life. So it's a research not only on the physical plane, but on all the planes, and for that we need to awaken a deeper perception. Group 2, the starting point of theosophical science is the three fundamental principles that we find in the proem. And HPB says the whole secret doctrine is based on those principles. So we have there like our main axioms, in a sense. And then theosophical science is an exploration and analysis of living nature, the idea that nature is not just inorganic and dead, and the seen laws and also the unseen laws, but not with with just an intellectual endeavor. We, from the theosophical point of view, we do this with love and respect for all living things. And this, of course, is lacking in regular science in general. And I think, there is not, in general, in scientists, the sense of, maybe some biologists that work with wildlife, they do develop this. Otherwise, you go to the lab and these things have no place, in science in general. And then the inquiry must be ethical, fearless, and non-dogmatic, and humble. All theosophical ideals. So then group 3, the pursuit to experience and understand truth verified by the three fundamental propositions. Again, there is the mention to these three basic principles on which the theosophical view is based. So the pursuit to experience and understand. I think this to experience is part of the scientific spirit. In science, you want to experience in the sense of experiments. You want to actually do these things. Not just understand, but you work with it. So I think that's interesting. It's not to understand truth, but also to experience it. And then the discovery of natural law, which is organized knowledge via an integral process, which is cooking and tasting the cosmic soup. Remember, this was before lunch. And you will see as in a Zen thread, you will see these esoteric references all along. Then group 4, the discovery and study of the one life as revealed in the laws of nature. So again here, I think this theosophical idea that laws of nature are not blind, are not mechanical. There is a life expressing through them. The laws of nature are the expression of this one life. And this includes not only the physical nature, but also a moral dimension based on the interconnectedness and interdependence of all things, which demonstrates the law of harmony. So how all things are connected and depend on each other. We can learn the law of harmony from that. So I think we see these essential theosophical elements in this definition. Group 5, science is one of the three legs of the stool on which truth rests. The other two being sports and entertainment. No. I don't know, they didn't say what, but I suppose it's science and philosophy. No, philosophy and religion. So we have science, philosophy, and religion, which are the foundation of truth. And then the validation of the laws of the universe, visible and invisible, through fact-finding and comprehension of truth. So again, the mention to all the planes, to something more than nature. Now, the challenge that we have when we talk about all this is the fact-finding. If it is going to be a science, we need to devise some methods to measure these things. Otherwise, it is a philosophy, it is a religion. I mean, we can postulate all of this, but there has to be a way to a verification of that. Like, for example, Einstein didn't do any experiments for his ideas, but he found a way to put it in mathematical, expressions. And many of these ideas, it took over 100 years to verify the ideas. But science took it seriously because there was a path for verification. I think many theosophical ideas can be like Einstein. These ideas are not based on experiment. Of course, the adepts did these experiments and research, but when we propose this, we don't have experiments to back them up, although in some aspects, as we will see, there may be some experiments. But we have to learn to present it in a way that science could somehow falsify it. This is something, technically in science, the idea is that a theory is scientific if there are ways to verify it or to deny it, to prove it wrong, basically. You can never quite prove something right, but you can prove it wrong. So you could say, all sheep are white. Well, you can never see all sheep, so you cannot prove that that is right. But if you find one that is black, then you are falsifying that. You are saying this is not true. So that is something basic in science. If we propose something, we have to provide some kind of way of testing it. So we'll see a little more about that later if we have time. And then group 6, science in the theosophical sense is the investigation of matter as described in the Mahatma Letter 10 or 88, which is from physical to spiritual matter. We mentioned that in particular because in that letter the master says, we believe in matter alone. You say, what does this mean? But then when you see how they describe matter, it's from spiritual matter that Blavatsky would call later in the Secret Doctrine substance, for example, which is the basis for consciousness, down to physical matter. And the master says that matter is also motion, or consciousness is also energy. So we said that it's the investigation of matter on all the planes and its interactions. In other words, it is the study of the law on the physical, moral, intellectual, and spiritual planes. Other groups came to the same idea. And then we did, I say we because I was part of that group, a little play with words. As Herman mentioned, science is love of knowledge. And using HPB's definition yesterday for philosophy, we could say that theosophical science is the knowledge of love. Just as philosophy was the wisdom of love, science is the knowledge of love, the understanding of the operation of love. And in that article, Blavatsky says that this love is like Fohat or Eros as the god. Fohat is the intelligent principle that organizes the development and evolution of matter. So I think that would be quite appropriate. All right. Any comments about question 1? Well, we can also talk at the end, but since it is fresh. Yes.
Would you say that Fohat, as it is like a connecting principle, and the title of this conference has integral and integration built into it? I was wondering if you could speak to that just a bit.
Yes, HPB says that Fohat is universal love from the point of view of bringing together. Interestingly enough, it's also the principle of repulsion. So these are two sides of the same thing. But I think that Fohat, in the way that HPB describes it in the stanzas when talking about the spiritual planes more, has this connotation of integration. On the physical plane, she says electromagnetism and all the forces derived from it are a manifestation of Fohat. And of course, electromagnetism also has to do with bringing together, with moving. So I think that, we could say Fohat is the thing that brings, or the principle that brings things together, connects them. Fohat connects, Blavatsky says in The Secret Doctrine, the first world to the second, Atma to Buddhi. It generates, the vehicle for the divine, so yes. Anything else? All right. So second question, how can you make the effort to develop science in yourself and stimulate it in others? So in our group, we had John that kept saying ourselves and others are not different. So just keep that in mind. And I think that is important because in all the days we came to that. Well, if you really produce it in yourself, you are stimulating others. Now, there are certain specific actions that we can do so that we can, externally from outside stimulate others. But if we don't have it in ourselves, no matter what we do, we are not going to be able to stimulate it. So the separation is only on the level of illusion, but still we can talk about some specific actions. So group 1, develop an increasingly impersonal inner perception and sensitivity to the multidimensional laws of cause and effect. You see, it's interesting, impersonal. If you think science needs that element of impersonality. The ideal scientist that I have not met yet, but the ideal scientist is impersonal, objective, doesn't let his or her biases be in the way. So there is this idea there. But then we extend it more beyond the physical plane to this multidimensional world in which we live and the chain of causation. And then sharing your findings with others by using practical examples and encouraging dialogue. So as we become more sensitive, as we develop an inner perception, as we were saying, always impersonal, otherwise, Blavatsky says, when we start raising our consciousness to the inner planes, if we are stuck in desire, personality, then everything that is spiritual, she says, turns into astral, in the sense of just becomes biased by the personal equation. So if we, in the principle in yoga, in researching on the inner planes, is that there has to be this impersonality. So, and then, of course, that will communicate to others through practical examples and also encouraging dialogue when we share our findings. Then group 2, be curious and open to opposing views. Again, this is part of the impersonality. Can we focus on ideas, not on people? And ideas, not my ideas, ideas in general. Can we look at the ideas and see the value in them in an impersonal way? Don't take anything for granted. Ask questions and listen with love. You see, love, impersonality. To me, it's remarkable that in the different groups, these things are quite consistent. Seek truth and discuss potential applications and relevant principles in order to awaken latent knowledge and intuitive insight. So seek truth, and then trying to make it practical, relevant, so that we can awaken an intuitive insight. In the quotes of the Mahatma letters that I'll present, there is something of this too. Then group 3, identify with nature and natural law. Identify, you see this, there is an idea, this is also interesting. In general, in science, you separate from the object, and then you describe it from far away. And that is okay, but as we get closer to the essences, there is the need to become one with it, to know from within, not so much from outside. So little by little, there is this sense, we feel nature inside of us. It's not that we are just observing it. If I watch, as I mentioned somewhere because somebody brought it up, if we watch a plant from outside, it's just something there that we can describe in mechanical ways. If we are sensitive, we see that there is a consciousness. We feel a consciousness there. And I think that's part of how we explore the science on the inner planes, in a sense. Let go of preconceptions, be open to all possibilities, and forget self, again, in personality. And then how we share it, live it with enthusiasm. That is very important. If we share what we know, and it may be very essential for us, but we say, well, this is really great. You should try, you know. We are not sharing the passion, the enthusiasm. So I think that's important. Be a role model as far as we can, you know, do your best, but with humility, as in another slide was mentioned. And here comes the esoteric one. Share the soup and the recipe. Meditate on it. All right. I hope it's obvious to you that all this means to share the soup and the recipe. It should be obvious. Then group 4, again, using the 3 fundamental propositions or principles as a basis for sifting the true from the false, the everlasting from the fleeting. So in the Theosophical tradition, we have these foundations against which we can verify what we see and go back and verify, you know, if what we are perceiving, how does that relate in the context of these 3 great principles. This will lead to self-transformation and furthering inspiration, curiosity, and exploration in others. So again, if we can begin to perceive the truth, there is a transformation in us that is communicated to others. Group 5, courage to investigate the questions that arise in yourself. This is a different element in this, because many times we have doubts and we don't pay attention to them because we don't think we can find out. So either we go immediately to somebody that we suppose that that person knows, as HPV says, don't go and ask those who seem to know. All they can give you is exoteric fragments. Sure, we can share concepts, but it's just concepts. Of course, sometimes concepts are necessary for you to do your inner exploration, but what is more important is just, work with it yourself. Have the courage to look. It doesn't matter. Don't start with, oh, I'm never going to figure it out. Blavatsky, in her esoteric instructions, said, you should never ask a question to anybody before you exhausted your own resources, because then you are developing your inner perception. So first, try your best. Then, sure, you can ask somebody, and the answer may be good for you to do your inner exploration, but not the other way around. And it's true that there is a certain courage that is needed. And then also there is a courage to respond to the questions that arise in other people. So again, we find this in the Theosophical tradition very often. People asking us questions. Some of them are easy, some of them are not. Some of them are controversial, some of them are not. There is a level of courage that we need. And again, how we respond to the questions, it depends on our personality. Not all of us have the same kind of personality. Some people are, able to put words together, and they can answer from that point of view. Other people can answer with inner inspiration, with affection, with, service. So in whatever way that we do it. But again, we need a certain courage to face the public. It's easier to just close our doors and stay with our group that we are comfortable with, but we are not doing the work that the masters expect from us. And then walk your talk. Again, as we were saying, try to be a role model. But again, with humility, we are all just learning. So if you are honest, people will know it, even if you make mistakes. And then group 6, live an exploratory and experimental attitude in life, both in daily life and spiritual. So exploratory and experimental, these are qualities of science. So we should try to have this attitude in our life. This is our own laboratory. So we have to experiment within us, how do I deal with emotions, with desires, with my thoughts, with actions? Blavatsky or any theosophical teacher is saying, deal with it in this way. Well, try it, experiment with it. And I think that's part of the scientific approach to it, not just the philosophy of it. And then challenge and stimulate curiosity in others. How do we stimulate? Well, challenge people not in better than you, I will challenge you, but, oh, that's very interesting. Why do you think that is? Or how come that this, I'm trying to stimulate people to think rather than giving them the answers. And then ask the right questions, both to others and to yourself, approaching the inquiry from the higher principles, and seek and show the interconnections that exist. Like ecology is a good example of that. We said that the fact that everything is alive, moving. Always try to go back to the idea of unity, connection, coming together. So that was the idea of developing science within ourselves and in others. Any comment or question? Over there, Erwin? No.
I've kind of waded through all the three, religion, philosophy, and science, and since it hasn't been mentioned, but I think it's kind of critical, is that first, that if we come from above below, then can you say something about the use of analogy and correspondence? Mm-hmm. Because in the process of the creative imagination of analogy and correspondence, one can move beyond the physical in the descriptions of things, mm-hmm. and can have more of a multi-level focus, kind of recognizing different levels, which conform to different levels of consciousness, and it's the consciousness that's missing from today's science. Mm-hmm. So could you say something more about how analogy and correspondence as a methodology fits into what we've been talking about?
Yes, that is an important point at the level of the methodology. Blavatsky and the masters placed emphasis on that. In the Mahatma letters, we find a few times where the master tells Synod, use always analogy as a guide. Now, what I found when I tried to do that throughout the years, what I found is that we need to develop the ability to have an abstract mind. Because, for example, some examples that you see in the Mahatma letters, the master says, just as in a baby, the baby has some hair, is born with some hair and some teeth, that then they will fall. The same happens in the planet. So you look in the planet, if you are looking for teeth and hair, you won't find it. But then the master goes on and says, the first plants on Earth were just like fern, and they were, very subtle kind of vegetables. The first rocks were also, he says, like the teeth in a human being were soft, and they were discarded, and then there are harder rocks, for example. So analogy is very good, but then we have to have the ability of abstraction and then see the principles. Again, the master says there is no difference between the creation of a mosquito and a solar system. What does this mean? Again, if we can see the abstract patterns through which certain things go, then analogy is great. Now, if we cannot do that, many times it's misleading, because we could say, okay, I have a personality, therefore God must have a personality. And there is a personal God just as there is a personal human being. So it has some challenges. I love analogy. I'm not trying to talk it down. But I noticed that it is a science in itself. We need to learn how to think in an abstract way by identifying patterns, devoid of what particular form it takes. And I think this is is how our mind may conceive something that is unknown. Because there is another letter where the master says, I cannot tell you this because you don't have words to understand, to receive this information. So I think that through analysis, we can create a vehicle, so to say, for an insight to come and take form. But that, again, that conception has to be quite abstract. And yes, I think that's part of how we should study, with analogy and correspondence. I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
No, that's fine.
Back there, Erwin. Oh, you have it.
Just a little thought that perhaps after the analogy and correspondence, finding astral patterns, that behind those is a intuitive metamathematical equation that creates these patterns that might be aligned to whatever is the Dhyani's metaphysical impress on matter, following a kind of mathematics of the soul. Just something to think about.
Yes, and the geometry too. And I have some friends that work on that line in Argentina, and they have come to some insights following the geometry and the math, very interesting. So, and of course, the fourth stanza is all about the math behind the universe. So yes, that is a path. Not everybody has a mathematical mind, but for those who have, it is a very interesting path too.
Just to continue in that line of thinking, like you said, in The Voice of Silence, in the, I think, page 89, she goes off massively into this encryption of numerical insanity, as it seemed to me when I was trying to decode it for weeks. And there's pi in it, and there's everything in it, and I just went nuts. And it's so, and there's no explanation.
Yeah, well, it was insanity for HPV too. I don't know if you know the story that I think it was the Countess Watchmeister that told this story, that she went to HPV's room and she kept throwing papers. She was writing and say, no, this is not right, and throwing papers and trying again. And so she asked, Blavatsky, what is wrong? And she said, I keep trying to write this, and the master keeps telling me it's not right, it's not right. So the HPV's sister, I think, not Denise, I don't remember, sister or Denise, came, and she knew mathematics. So HPV said, oh, great. Do you know what pi is? And the sister said, yes, it's a kind of cake. Oh, don't make a fool of yourself, she said. Pi, the mathematical. So then she told her, and HPV was, she said, was placing the decimal point wrong, and then everything else. So when she got it right, then she understood what she was doing wrong. So HPV didn't know a lot of math, but the master, of course, was there and was telling her, keep trying, keep trying. And I think that is interesting because the master could have told her, hey, you are putting the decimal point in the wrong place. But we have to develop all of this. It would be easy for the master to come and do everything. Anything else? Meanwhile, poor HPV had a hard time. All right, so let's go to the last question, 3. What changes would occur in society if more people develop science in themselves? And work out 3 examples. This is where we are not quite good at math. There were far more than 3 examples in most places. They are hidden. It seems 3, but they are not 3. You see. So group 1, this was a good group. Public discourse would be more discriminating, informed, discerning, and holistic. So no Twitter, Discourse, discriminating, informed, discerning, holistic. And this is something that I thought too, that we didn't get to talk in the group. We tend to react just from prejudices, from emotions, from biases. If there was a more scientific approach in the spiritual sense, yes, we should be able to see what the facts are and recognize them. There is a lot of problems in this country now. There is a reason why certain people are doing certain things. They are really suffering. It's not just to say, oh, they don't understand anything. What is going on there? And what are the causes? What are the correct, solutions that we can find? But no, all we do is just fight. So I think that this would be an important result of having a more scientific attitude, impersonal, with love, everything that we saw in other groups. Then research will start from universal principles and be more oriented to the common good. We will see this in some quotes of the Mahatma letters. Now again, this is tricky. Research will start from universal principles. Yes, as we said, the 3 fundamental propositions and all of that. But for it to be science, as I said, we need to give a way, a path for verification. If we start, all life is one, that is, great philosophy, spirituality, metaphysics, but if we want to turn that into science, we need to devise some ways in which this can be verified to some extent. And this is the difficulty, because science grows little by little in the ability to perceive these universal principles. So right now it's kind of hard, but as it was said in our groups, ecology is something that begins to show you, the interconnection. And it happens also at the level of the cell. We started by looking at the atoms or at the isolated genes. Then we realized, well, this gene is connected to the ones that come after it, so we have to see the whole section of the DNA. Then we realized the DNA is folded, and this sequence that is far down the road is actually interacting with this. So we need to see the whole region of the DNA. And then we realize, well, this depends on what is going on in the cell as a whole. So nature takes you to the totality, whether you like it or not. So those are maybe avenues that we could use in some way to stimulate a theosophical approach. And then actively sharing theosophical principles of science with the scientific world, as, for example, famously the Dalai Lama is doing. So again, engaging in a dialogue with science would be something that would change as more and more, a larger part of the society would accept the theosophical approach. Group 2, first, the effect on social science, determine the cause and educate people to solve the problems collectively and scientifically. Maybe what I just said, what is really happening, what is the cause of the problems, not just dismiss them, not just say, oh, that person is ignorant. Let us look at the cause and how we can solve it. Then on medical science, this is where the two is kind of tricky. Determine the cause first, approach the issues of health from an individual perspective, in the sense that we are not all the same, therefore the response is not necessarily the same. But again, trying to determine the cause, not the effect. I have a fever, take this, the fever will go down, but that has nothing to do with the cause. So make it, if we look at things from a theosophical point of view, it's always a question of trying to determine the causes. And then taking personal responsibility for health requires knowledge of cause and effect. So again, and a change of, there would be also a change in the attitude toward dying. Today, we think that dying is the ultimate evil, and we need to extend life no matter what. It doesn't matter what kind of, quality of life is there. The extending life is a value in itself. And of course, all that vanishes as we realize more and more our true nature. So sometimes death is the best step, or the best next stage that comes. And I think that would be very important also. I have the impression that when in the Mahatma letters, the master says that religions are the cause of 2/3 of the evil in the world, a lot of that has to do with the fear of death, that because the master mentions with all the hells and all that, people die in fear. Many of them live in fear of going to hell, of what will happen. How do we depict death? Like these awful monsters or, corpses, The Walking Dead, if you watch it, it's not pretty. While death is an angel that frees us from the limitations. So you can see how that could change. And then the third, applied science, greater awareness of the limits of this field, the limits in the application of the knowledge. Only apply science if you are sure it will benefit all beings, not just now, but for future generations also. So this is, again, a very interesting concept. Not all things should be applied, and we know that. We should be very careful what things we should engage in, and not only with a short view, but for future generations also. All right, group 3, integration of scientific disciplines. That is more unity between all the disciplines. To some extent, it is happening simply because they are discovering that life is so complex that they cannot solve it from only one discipline. So they are beginning to cooperate, even computer people with biologists, with physicists. And of course, that would increase if the theosophical approach of science becomes more prevalent. Then diversity of thought, open-mindedness, leads to spiritual growth and to a greater mindfulness, connected to what we were saying, more unity, more respecting diversity. Unity is not uniformity. So diversity working together. And then healthcare would consider both mind and body and use natural methods. Another group talked about that too, looking at healthcare, at the human being not just as a material body, but as a mind too. And then use methods that are more natural. And then our Zen koan, the soup will feed the whole world. All right. This is the most valuable part. Don't laugh. You know. Group 4. Changes. More women would be in the science, technology, engineering, arts, and mathematics, and more men in social sciences. And then establishment of an international center of scientific inquiry for humanity, which would include research into the visible, invisible, morality and ethics, the science of the soul in all the layers of life, not only in human beings, but the soul, the universal soul, everywhere. So a little, more integration, of course, not this, but also, I don't want to characterize things, but I think women are wiser than men in the sense that, not all men, there are no generalizations, but I see a tendency in men to work, to be okay when the work that is done is merely intellectual. If science begins to be something that is more connected to the welfare of humanity and all of that, I think also that would because there is, in many women there is a natural nurturing tendency. In men also, please don't take this, because we have male and female. But I think that many of our disciplines are made by men with the interest that statistically speaking appeal to men, and logically, women will not be interested. See, the social sciences are more about the person, and I think that, so if we can integrate all of that, of course those barriers would fall more easily. And if what I said is not politically correct, just ignore it, But and then the establishment of an international scientific center, more holistic, I think, that would happen. Then science in service to all beings, eliminate superstitions. Again, this part reminds me of having a more social discourse that is, more rational and also affective, not rational as intellectual, but questioning our ideas so that we don't fall into superstition. And there would be the impact social groups to encourage more harmony and understanding. And the last group, medicine would include all dimensions of self, as in homeopathy, traditional Chinese medicine, etc. Again, mind, body, spirit. Then more sensitive scientists would conduct explorations, keeping in mind the consequences of discoveries. Scientists like to say that science is amoral, not immoral, it's amoral, beyond morality. So they can do whatever, and if somebody uses that wrongly, it's not the scientist's problem. But I don't think that can be held, for much longer. We see the consequences of science on the planet, on our health. So certainly, scientists have to become more sensitive and start looking at the consequences of what they do at the chemical, vegetable, animal, human, elemental, or devic levels. And then more responsible scientists would pay attention to where the funding comes from, because a lot of science is driven by money. The money is driven by selfish interest in general. So we read what money wants, because the books that are published are the books that are going to sell. We investigate what money wants, what those who give you money think that they can get money from the investment. We are educated in, you see, everything is ruled by money. So it's okay, we need that. But if we are more responsible, then we will start questioning, where is this coming from? Perhaps, we said in the group in the past, the early philosophers of science, they were people who were maintained by rich people, and they had freedom to explore, just explore. They didn't have to produce a result that could be monetized. They just explored. Today, I was in science, and you have to produce a result. So don't even think looking into this that is essential for humanity, but you don't know if you will get any results. So there has to be some way in which science would not depend on this self-serving kind of funding. All right, any questions, comments? Yes.
I'd like to ask the question about the slide that had death on it. If a person is going to die, and just in case you can't answer this question, maybe somebody in the room can, it doesn't really matter how much effort the medical doctors are going to impart onto this person. He's going to die anyway because the soul is ready to go off. It also doesn't matter how much effort the medical doctors will impart on this person if he's not supposed to die. So does it really matter if we're trying to save him or not save him? Because if he's not meant to go, he's not going to go. And if he's meant to go, he's going to go.
Yes, there is a way of living. You know, for example, one of the qualities that Shankaracharya proposes is to live without trying to change anything. You know, things come, and specifically difficulties come, you take them on. And you work with them, but you don't try to fix them for the sake of fixing them. This is part of the order, you work with them. And you could live a life where you say, you know, I get sick, I'm not going to try to fix it. Now, if you live that life, I think is great. Now, there may be a path that is more or less in the middle where you try to fix things to some extent, but you are not willing to cross the line where you start generating a lot of disharmony and chaos and suffering just to keep pushing something that is not meant to be. So without needing to go to the absolute extreme of never taking a medicine, you know, I think we can apply our discernment. And if we are not afraid of dying, well, we may try, and if we see it's not working, we let it go. It's okay. This is, you know, what it's meant to be. So, yeah.
I think that Joe suggests something in the question that's not correct. He neglects free will. I mean, if I'm going to live in a certain way, drinking a lot of alcohol, you know, drugs maybe or whatever, I will shorten my life. It's not my karma to live, you know, let's say 60 years. No, I shorten my life because I use my free will. So that's the point. The other thing is, I agree totally with you that if you live according to the laws of nature, you live a certain, everybody has a certain amount of vitality that he can use, and he can use it in an intelligent way, and then he can live a long time. But it's not the way that, as Joe says, that you have to die at a certain moment. No, it's your free will that shorten or maybe lengthen that period.
Yeah. Yeah, I didn't take it in that rigid way, but it is, you know, HPV mentions this idea in India that we come with a certain amount of heartbeats, and according to how we live our life, we can consume those heartbeats, you know, faster or so whether it's, you know, it is accurate, the idea that is measured by the heartbeats or not, I think the idea is that there is a way to live that will take the most of what we bring, and there is a way to live that will shorten that. But there is, in that way, we could say it is fixed and it is not fixed, because our free will cannot alter that. Yeah.
So this is just an observation of mine. I have seen 3 elderly people in my lifetime who had an illness that 2 generations ago would have been the end of their life, but because they lived in the late 20th century, it extended their life, and they developed Alzheimer's after that, which I don't know what to think about it. But I wonder if that has any implications for, and I'm not asking for any answers, I'm just throwing it out there as an observation. I wonder if it has any implications for our culture.
I think anything that comes from attachment is going to backfire in one way or the other. Now we can extend life, and what do we do with all the older people? They are not producing, our economies feel the weight of it, it produces a lot of troubles. Of course, I'm not saying we should do something about it, but I mean, and I consider death as our aim, you know. Sometimes people ask you, are you afraid of dying? I'm afraid of having to be reborn again in a baby and a child that doesn't know anything. Dying, you know, is going back home. So, but yes, when we try to push things artificially, it always backfires. There are illnesses that people didn't have before, probably because they died, you know, healthier than we do. Yes, over there, and then Johanna.
It seems like a lot of these comments are pointing to the kind of obvious thing. What are you living for? After all, HPB used doctors, but she had something to do. And we say, well, she didn't finish the third volume and so on. Well, that may have been partly due to us, that an original plan may have gotten cut short because what was given was not taken up in the appropriate, full, enthusiastic way. So we have no idea why she went when she went, but we know why she didn't just go the first time she got sick. She had something to do. So I think the question always is, do you have something to do besides survive? Do you have, what are you living for?
You know, I don't want to have lack of compassion, but I always say that. Is it good for people to live longer when the karmic causes that a person is generating are more causes for illusion? You know, once your vitality, again, it's very difficult to talk about all of this. But in my life, I would want that the moment that my inner self cannot take hold of my body and my personality begins to be stronger, I want to go. I don't want to keep producing causes that then I will have to, you know, face. Yeah.
I don't have to say so much, for that was my thing as well. And we have an experience that someone worked for a large theosophical task. We know him, of course, and became ill. And with sheer willpower, ended that task and say, now it's time. And you know perhaps the translator of Plotinus, the Enneads, Stephen McKenna. Yes, he worked his whole life. And the moment he was finished, he said goodbye. Yes, for it was his task. That's why we are living for. And that makes it so much easier for you to choose, do I want to live or do I want to part? What do I have to do still? And if you only use doctors to prolong life without any meaning, then you have to think deeper by yourself.
Yeah.
During our study group, we touch the use of resources and resources and conscious use, and understanding what our resources are given in this, say, life, in this incarnation. And this may, if you develop this kind of feeling, understanding using the science of Theosophical science, so this will help to solve many problems, including the premature illness or not correct how treating own illness and so on. So I still believe this important part of what we can develop and what we can actually develop in others.
Yeah.
Yes, I'd just like to ask a real beginner's question. From the way in contemporary science, there seems to be, like in all aspects of society, such a gap between an attempt at metaphysical understanding and ethics. And if I were a scientist today and I wanted to improve my intuition, why would leading an ethical life or a theosophical life, what would that help me do and help kindle what kind of intuition?
Mm-hmm. Well, the main problem we have is that I spent like at least 10 years plus 13 years in my scientific career. I had 1 year of philosophy. 1 year of philosophy. That's all I had, which was once a week, an hour, Friday, when we were all thinking of the weekend. And no philosophical, ethical, metaphysical training to a scientist. Of course, I was in the TS. What they were teaching us was very basic for me. And my friends and colleagues used to tell me, you know, I don't understand what they are saying. It's like they are my head is round and they are trying to push my head through something that is square. It just doesn't go through. These were PhD students. So this is a problem in science. We need to, not only in science, everywhere, but we need to show the value of a moral life for perception, of an ethical life, not only for interrelationship, but for perception. Plato, said all the time, without virtue, you cannot do anything. So I think this is part of what should be taught. From a theosophical point of view, wisdom comes from within. We have Buddhi is the innate divine wisdom in us. The reason why we are not wise is because that wisdom cannot come to the physical brain. And the reason why it doesn't come is because our personality is not in tune with the higher nature. It's out of tune. So anything that comes from the higher nature gets distorted. So if we can harmonize our nature, then there is this insight that comes from within, not from what I studied in science. And then with all you studied, and you look at a problem, and then there is this insight that shows you the solution. In very little things, I experienced that. In big things, Einstein says that's how he got, So all this should be taught, but, well, maybe in the 6th sub-race, if we are lucky. All right, so our time is up because we have to do the closing. The quotes that I had, I wrote an article that is called Science, Modern, and Occult. The second part is my analysis of how the theosophical approach could participate in the development of science, but also what foundation science needs, according to the Mahatmas, so that they get engaged in participating with science. Basically, the masters say scientists have to be interested in the human welfare. If they are just playing with concepts, if they are developing better iPhones, we don't care about that. We care about science concerned with the spiritual growth of humanity. We need scientists that are responsible, that are not going to abuse the power. So they give a series of elements. And then there are ways in which we can interact. But I wanted to spend more time, the main purpose was what we did with the groups. If you are interested in that, it's on my website, or I can send it in an email, the article. So, okay. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.